Good morning and welcome to our session today, sharing what we've learned over the last year through our XX Plus Factor research program. My name's Chris Lees, I'm Chief Executive of DataClan, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by my colleague and friend, Dr. Rob Ray, DataClan's Research Director and lead on the program, as well as representatives from our research partners, Lucy Malarkey, Managing Director of Wish, Alma Sharon, Marketing and Communications Lead at Greenacre, Nick Turner, Executive Director of Communications and Customer Service at Believe Housing, and Deborah Constance, Chair of Wish. We will be hearing more from them later. Just like to remind people who have used Zoom before, or let you know if you're new to Zoom, seems hard to believe these days, that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please use that if you have any questions for Rob or our research partners during the course of the session today. We will have some time to get to those questions, and those that we don't get to, we will respond to afterwards. So before I hand over to Rob to talk you through what we did and what we found, I wanted to provide a bit of a backdrop to this work that we've done. So we faced a number of challenges in the conversations we're having, and they really fell into several categories. So firstly, what we were hearing was that our understanding of sex and gender is evolving. You know, we look at things like the gender pay gap, a very classic measure, and that's closed from 47.6% in 1970 to 16.8% in 2016. Which on the face of it seems like great progress, but 16.8% is still a big number, and progress has been slowing. So we have this changing narrative around gender inequality, but we also have a wider question around gender, and indeed not just gender, but other aspects of equality and inequality. So underpinning some of this was whether gender was being considered at all, or simply sex. Lots of debate around gender perspectives are in the news, J.K. Rowling last year, and many other examples. And even when we think about something like the gender pay gap, it only considers the gap between men and women. And this ambiguous use of the term gender is quite widespread across government. In the social housing sector, the regulator of social housing sector has seemed quite confused about it in some of their questions for the required regulatory returns even. But we wondered, you know, which is the best indicator of the kind of behaviors you're likely to see, somebody's sex at birth or their self-identified gender. Also, looking back, historically, there's been an enormous amount of research done into sex and leadership and gender and leadership. So there's a huge amount of evidence built up over decades and decades. And pretty much it all shows the same kind of thing, that it's a man's world. The Me Too movement, the gender pay, all of these things that show how this world is definitely easier for men than women in so many ways. And this body of knowledge identifies a lot of correlations in this kind of data. So for example, we know pretty robustly that companies with more women on their boards perform better. But the research hasn't answered the questions of causality. So are these companies, for example, that perform better with more women on the board, are they doing better because they have more women on the board? Or do they have more women on the board because actually they're the kind of organization that more equally values people's contributions, and a natural consequence of that would be to have more women on the board? And despite all of this work, and you know, in many cases, some good initial progress, as we saw with things like the gender pay gap, there's now an enormous frustration that further improvements seem to be really elusive. So that kind of sets a bit of the scene for how this research came to start a little over a year ago. And what I'd like to do now is hand over to Rob to tell us a little bit about what's been done and what we've found so far. So Rob, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I'm just going to share my screen with a couple of slides. Great. So I mean, I think the first thing to kind of reiterate that Chris was had covered there was around this kind of this notion of collaboration. And one of the things we want to do is to kind of we want our starting point really, as Chris says, as the narrative become kind of more intense, and the question of gender equality popped up more and more through our conversations and through with our partners and so on. We wanted to kind of launch this piece of research to try to kind of get multiple perspectives on the gender equality question and to understand, you know, beyond just the kind of views of the aging, you know, white hipsters that Chris and I have become, but to try to get that multiple perspective and to get create a more comprehensive picture of the research going forward. So in doing so, we identified some sort of sector-specific values that we wanted to understand within the context of the gender equality research, particularly around retention and recruitment, and we'll hear from Alma, our partner in that area in a second, but also around the question about the utility and the cultural impact of gender research, to make sure that any of the outputs and findings from the research would be able to would have some operational application and some utility in the real world scenarios. The third part around collaboration really was to understand how we could raise the profile of this type of research. And in particular, there was a huge amount of evidence dating back 20s, 30s into the 60s, and throughout the 80s, 90s, and up to the present day, there's been a proliferation of a wealth of evidence, but was sometimes frustrated in getting traction. And the objective of this exercise really was to try to distill that research down into some meaningful, specific research questions. So hopefully you can be able to see these. Apologies again for that. The real kind of meat of the research, as I say, was based on a lot of existing evidence and some of an evidence review, or in other words, a kind of literature review that we conducted over 6 or 7 months, and what we found there was quite telling. So, first of all, within the reframing of the gender dimension and self-identification, that part of the research was something that came out quite strongly, and in particular, this is around understanding self-identification and gender identification beyond just the traditional sex and biological definitions. In particular, the data links back to trait and not just specifically gender was a very important finding. And one of the things I wanted just to share with you is 2 or 3 examples which I thought stood out around understanding the relationship between gender and leadership outputs, which was the kind of the focus of what we were trying to look at. One Credit Suisse study in the 1980s discovered that the difference between having no women on your board of directors or having one woman was up to 26% in terms of the performance improvement. Other studies around a similar time showed that by aggressively promoting women, and again, just for context, this is, you know, a lot of the research was around the biological sex-defined differences rather than a particular or specific traits or attributes. But these studies found that there was a 34% increase in profit by aggressively promoting women into higher echelons of organizations and into senior leadership positions. And one of the kind of key findings really here was that seemed to turn on its head and refute traditional understandings or a traditional stereotype that men, because of tenacity or aggressiveness or other attributes, were better suited to creating organizations with profit. And that started, there was during that time a range of studies. McKinsey's report, again towards the very beginning of the 1990s, showed that 47%, this is a Latin American study, 47% improvement in overall performance by aggressively promoting women to higher senior leadership positions. Again, more recently, there was a meta-analysis of 45 studies by Eagly, and this showed that women were more likely to have a transformational impact on organizations from a leadership perspective. Again, this began to kind of unpick and undermine some of the traditional assumptions and challenge some of those stereotypes. And then lastly, Babikoff, a report by Babikoff, and this really kind of sums up some of the key message that moved us on to the next level of our research, and that was that while there were perceptions about differences between traditional sex stereotyped individuals in terms of reflection and perceptions of their own teams, there was no discernible difference in the effectiveness between genders, and that was something that we found very interesting. Again, I would like to emphasise that one of the real frustrations here, and one of the reasons for this research and the wider collaboration, was to try to move beyond, to try to get some traction on some of this evidence throughout the evidence review. And you'll see in the main report, if you read through this extensive amount of data, that it was almost irrefutable evidence that we needed to reevaluate and reframe the gender question. But yet there was a distinct lack of traction, and that was a common theme throughout the collaboration that we had with our colleagues.
As you've heard, there were some interesting findings, and as often happens with research, perhaps more questions than answers in some cases. What I'd like to do now is invite the partners that we have with us today to perhaps share their own perspectives and reflections and what their ambitions are perhaps in the future as well. And I'd like to start by inviting Lucy Malarkey to speak. So Lucy, get your camera on, and Lucy's been having some problems with her video, so please excuse that, but I'm pleased to say that we can hear her, which is the most important part here. So Lucy, over to you.
Hello, everybody. So yeah, I mean, it was absolutely fantastic for us to be involved. And as Chris said, you know, my name is Lucy Malarkey, and I'm the Managing Director for WISH, that's Women in Social Housing. We're a membership-based network for women working across the breadth of housing in the UK, you know, from people working in the social housing sector particularly, to those working in related roles, construction, accountancy, etc. Oh, I seem to have calmed down there. It's pretty evident from that, I think, why we would wish to be involved in this research. And what we know is that we do need to radically improve the profile of gender diversity in the social housing sector and those related industries. And whilst there's undoubtedly been progress made, it's definitely not job done. We do need to actively encourage more young women to choose careers in affordable housing and those related industries when they leave school, when they leave college, when they're leaving further education. And we need to ensure with that and alongside that, that our workplaces are inclusive, that they're gender inequality free, and that barriers to progressing and career opportunities are removed. We've just completed our annual WISH survey, and that's provided some really interesting and worrying insight. So we asked participants about barriers to progressing their careers, and over 30% of those who responded to the survey felt that they had experienced barriers in the workplace, in social housing. That's not good enough. A third of people means there's a lot more work to be done. And in terms of people personally experience gender inequality, again, over 40% are telling us that they have and that they continue to do so. So absolutely, work's been done. There's significantly more to do. And it's pieces of research like this and highlighting that need that is so important to make further progress.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. I mean, I say fantastic, of course. It's makes hard listening, actually, this information, this data about what is still happening and the frustrations we have that more isn't being done, and women in the workplace are still facing so many of these challenges. Is just enormously disappointing. Yeah. So thank you for that. I'd like to come to Alma. How about you? Would you like to tell us how it was for you taking part in this and what your kind of perspective on the work is and ambitions for the future?
Hi, yeah, I hope everyone can hear me and see me, and I do apologise if I start coughing and spluttering halfway through. I'm just getting over this horrible lurgy. Yeah, so I'm Alma Sharon. I am the marketing and comms lead for Greenacre, and we are I'd say, progressive recruiter and leadership development consultancy. And we cover all aspects of recruitment across the housing sector, across the UK, at all levels. And we have a diverse network, and we collaborate a lot with organisations across the sector, including the CIH and the wonderful Wish Network with Lucy Malarkey there. And we also do kind of quite a lot of research about leadership development and the employment landscape. And we've known for a long time how important diversity is for a successful team to operate, not just in terms of the bottom line, but in order to create a happy and fully functioning, successful, collaborative workforce. So it was really great to be asked to take part in this research, which I think is really valuable and much needed. So I think now more than ever, with the data showing us just how much the dynamic has changed now in terms of the employee-employer relationships, it's no longer so much about what the company is demanding from the candidate now as what is the offer coming from the employer. And there's been a real role reversal in terms of who holds the cards now, I'd say, especially over the past year with the Great Migration, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's been recoined several different phrases, but that's been happening with effect over the last couple of years. And we know statistically that the top priority for candidates looking for a new role now is not just about how much people are getting paid, but also top of that list is becoming what can the company offer? And that could be in terms of flexibility, positive company culture, including diversity, and a strategy that helps employees with their wellbeing support. And a lot of the studies that are starting to emerge now are showing that people don't really feel comfortable being open about their gender identity, because perhaps they might be afraid of conscious or unconscious bias, and that could get in the way of them perhaps doing their job effectively. So if we can create more open spaces for these dialogues to happen and to gather genuinely useful data on modern leadership traits which show that true gender diversity, which is about hiring people for their unique strengths, actually brings dividends, and when this is done in the right way, with the added bonus of kind of creating a welcoming, unbiased space for people of every gender identity to do what they do best and to feel good about being themselves, and bring them, bring their unique selves into the workplace without that fear of bias.
Hallelujah is all I can say to that, Alma. Thank you. So we'll come back to Lucy and Alma for some questions, I'm sure, shortly. But I think, Nick, we've managed to get you back. So, Nick.
Hello, do apologise. I think that Zoom is having a field day with us all this morning. And we will deal with that after this. Yes, thank you very much. For me, I just wanted to quickly touch on the fact that why we believe diversity is so important at every level in your organisation. We know that a healthy and level of diversity is good for business and good for culture. Everyone has touched on that and what they've said so far. But I think what we need to say is we can't simply talk the talk. You must walk the walk. There's a lot of rhetoric out there in our sector and further afield, but the rhetoric will get you nowhere. You must have tangible action. You can't simply wait for it to happen. You can't simply identify it and think, well, now we identified it and we know about it, then magically it will evolve and resolve itself. So, for example, at Believe Housing 10 years ago, we didn't have a diverse board. We did something about it. 5 years ago, we didn't have a diverse executive, so we did something about it. 3 years ago, we didn't have a diverse senior leadership team. You get my point. You have to make a real conscious effort to implement that change. It won't just happen. You can't just hope for the best. You have to get out there and you have to deliver. And once you've achieved one task, as you've seen over my potted history of 10 years, you can't simply stop. You must keep embedding the diversity, evolving with the diversity. We have so much more that we want to achieve, and we don't believe you can ever stand still when it comes to this topic. You must learn from each other and you must evolve. For example, if you look at diversity and its understanding, that's ever evolving. Say 50, 60 years ago, it simply meant the split between male and female. But nowadays, we now know that it means so much more. Diversity of thinking, background, culture, your life experiences. It's so much more. Diversity is not just a single topic. It is complex, and we need to respond to it. But if we don't start with very basic gender diversity, how on earth are we going to expect to move on to further diversity? And we know a diverse company has a richness to its culture, and it has depth in its thinking. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And a diverse company can respond to a diverse society. And that's what we now live in. So we have to provide an organisation that can respond to the society that it serves.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. I very much like that that expression, a diverse company can respond to a diverse society. That could be the soundbite of the session. So I'm not trying to set the bar too high for everybody else, but there you go. That's my soundbite of the session so far. So last but by no means least, I'd like to come to Deborah. So perhaps, Deborah, you can tell us a little bit about your experience of being involved and what your perspectives and reflections are.
Well, as Lucy, my colleague, has said, I'm the chair of WISH, Women in Social Housing, which is a network for women in the social housing sector of all persuasions, accountants, people who work for public sector, people who work in construction, architects, engineers, etc. And when I've reflected on the questions that we've been asking ourselves, during the time of setting up this research, as well as gender inequality impacting on the bottom line of a company, the fact that it has a direct impact on how our society thrives, both economically and socially, for me, it just makes it a no-brainer for something that we need to do something about. We have to keep moving this forward. Very similar for me to the question of the inequality in the pay gap between the top and the bottom parts of society. When you look at that, the wider that gap gets, society begins to break down. And, kind of when we look at gender inequality, if we don't address this, it's the impact on our society is just so negative because, parts of our society just aren't able to bring home the bacon, basically, as much as they would be able to. So one of the reasons I'm glad this research has taken place is because we answer the how. And, I've been really interested in looking at kind of the results so far and the gen map that's come forward, because this allows organizations to check the health of their organization, to use the map to match their current people profile against their targets, and it allows business outcomes to link with traits and behaviors. I think that's really exciting. I know that I've learned a lot out of this, particularly in terms of reframing my own understanding about gender diversity, understanding kind of how thinking has changed, really. And, I always thought of myself as being quite an open person. So if I need to kind of make those shifts in how I think lots of other people will be able to gain an understanding from the research that's done. And I think lastly, I just wanted to kind of reflect on the fact that going back to my experience, it's helped me to reframe my experience in some ways. Like lots of other women, especially the women here, I'm pretty certain that we've all had the experience where you're in a room and somebody thinks that you're there to make the tea or, to do some kind of admin work, and you're not necessarily there to make the decisions. But when I look back now, I can see actually that there have been, although I thought I was in, if you like, I framed it male and female, I now can see that there have been other people within those dynamics that I was able to connect with. But when I look at it through the lens of your research, I can see that they had traits that I was able to connect with, and that those traits are the ones that, you're not necessarily looking for somebody who's female, with a particular hairstyle or dress. What you're looking for is somebody with particular traits. So I'd like to leave it there, but thanks very much. I found it really, really useful, and I can't wait for this to move forwards.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deborah. So please leave your camera on, Deborah, and I'd like to invite our other panelists and Rob to get your cameras back on, and let's have a bit of a discussion here. I've got a few questions that have come in that we'll talk about. I think your point there, Deborah, towards the end was very well made. It's really interesting, isn't it, about how we select people that we relate to, how we, how people always seem to find their people, right? I don't know, anybody who's got children will probably recognize this in their friendship groups. My partner and I, we've got girls and boys, and one of my girls is gay, and she says all of her friends are gay. It's completely normal there. She was like scratching her head to try and think of straight friends. And a son, his friends, they're all straight, and they're like, oh no, hang on a second, I think so-and-so's gay. It's like people group together, right? And that's natural and human condition, but of course also is not diverse. And so it's bringing these two things together, recognizing how we are attracted to those that are alike, but valuing the difference at the same time. So I wonder, Alma, I'd like to come to you first, I think. So how important do you think understanding the matching of traits and behaviors in your placements, the recruitment and retention, how important are those things, matching those traits and behaviors to the requirements?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think it's really important, because not only do we want people to be happy in their jobs and less likely to want to leave, but also because we know that statistically, when we have got a healthy diversity of positive traits within a group, that group or team will be a lot more successful. And I think when we understand the unique traits that people bring to a group, we can play to their strengths, and then we can have better outcomes. And it really has to happen right from the start. So, how do we attract a diversity of people? Well, it can be simple things like, which will all come together, but it can be simple things such as a recruiter, we will often look at how we attract a diversity through the language that we use in our job adverts, the imagery and the visuals in our marketing, which is actually a lot more important than people realise. It's been shown to make a real difference in the way that people identify themselves as a viable candidate for that role. In other words, does the person on that job ad look like me? Does the company culture seem inclusive? Does it seem like they're going to want me in their team? And will I feel welcome here? And will I feel free to be me? And we can do the work here at the attraction stage and the recruitment stage, but once through the door, once through past the interview stage, or even through the door once hired, how do we know that the company is really going to be behaving in an inclusive way and really getting the very best out of their workforce in terms of diversity dividends? And once through the door, I think it's up to the organisation to, as Nick said, walk the walk. And as organisational leaders, particularly in the industries that still have a high level of ingrained bias, I'm not going to mention any names, but to model that behaviour that they want to see throughout their organisations. And as Deborah says, tools such as the GenMap tool gives organisations the opportunity to really look honestly at how well they're doing and how they can improve, really creating the spaces and the environment to make those improvements.
Yeah, thanks, Alma. And I know both you and Deborah mentioned GenMap there. We will be coming to that in a minute, and Rob will explain a little bit more about what that tool is. But I've got another question here coming. So, and this one is for you, Nick, I think. So you have a wide range of initiatives going on. How helpful has it been to add this gender research into the mix with all of the other things that are going on?
It's been really useful. I think it's important to always challenge yourselves and get a fresh perspective and stop and just check where you're at and if you're heading on the right direction, because in walking the walk you can sometimes motor on, can't you? And not stop and think, are we doing the right thing? How does this fit with our vision? And do we need to change? Do we need to flex? We have a number of initiatives from the top to the bottom. So we have a board trainee program where young women are not on boards, they're not represented. So how do you get young women on board? Because they're too young, that they haven't got the experience, and they worry that they haven't got the technical ability and things. So we've introduced a board trainee program, and that's not just to feed onto our board, that's to feed onto any board. They will finish our trainee program and they will go forth, they'll either join ours or go into something else. So something like this that starts with the gender, then looks at the traits and behaviours that you need at varying levels, really helps us refine what we're doing, right down to the front end where we're trying to recruit more female operatives. How do we use this research to help just finesse? Because we, like many others, have done different types of recruitment and got it wrong over the years, and learn from it. You have to step back and realize where you're not going in the right direction, use this kind of knowledge, and then move forward again.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Deborah, one for you here, I think. So in your role as chair of WISH, how important do you see this research being for gender equality and wider diversity issues?
Critical is, is a word that I would use. So having what we call a women, it's not a women only organized, well, it is, in terms of membership, but we do have men who attend our events. And, what we always say is that we need to collaborate with men, and in fact we need to collaborate with every part of the sector. So we've been having discussions about are we supporting our members who may be gay or transgender? Are we taking their needs into account? So this is really important to us, so that we just don't see it as a sex thing, male and female dichotomy, binary. We have to see it as much broader than that. And, we've had to ask ourselves questions, things that I'd never even thought about really in the past couple of years, about how do we approach the way that we deliver our events, and who are our members and what do our members actually need. So yeah, I think that this research is helpful for us, but it's also helpful for us in terms of talking to our partners out there, because all the time we're banging the drum for gender equality. It helps us to broaden our language, and it helps us, if we understand what we're talking about, it helps us to spread the message as well.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a confusing landscape sometimes. You read the government's guidance on gender pay gap, capturing gender data, and they say gender, parenthesis, men or women. And so it's easy to see why people confuse the concepts of biological sex and gender all the time, when the government itself is being misleading.
And I'll put my hands up. I think for when we set up Women in Social Housing over 20 years ago, it was about women, and we never even really we didn't think that we were excluding anybody by talking about women. But as time has gone on and you start to look into the conversation, you can see how you don't necessarily intend to exclude somebody, but you could, just by the language you use, by, as Alma was saying, by the imagery that you put out there. So it is really, it's our responsibility to look in ourselves and to make those improvements all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, please chime in.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm just listening to all of our partners there kind of reflect on what their experience of this exercise has been. And I think, I would echo with all of that. I mean, it's certainly a steep learning curve. I think one of the things that's really emerged from me, and again, is reiterated, but just listening to the guys talk there, is that this has got to, the research has got to have a real operational kind of utility, right? And I said that I think earlier, and I guess where it's worked really well is not just having, you know, we talk about kind of recruitment and retention and picking people for teams or team building or config, you know, what combination of people is going to be most effective to, you know, to achieve this outcome. And I think that what this has certainly helped, I think, us at DataCon and these guys as well, is to try to look at, you know, beyond just picking people on the basis of what you stereotypically think they're going to be good at doing. So, you know, you don't have job adverts that say, you know, what we want to do is recruit lots of women because we, you know, the assumption is that women are going to be much better at doing this than men or non-binary people and so on. So I think that it's really provided a kind of evidence base to be able to quantify almost that link between the traits and the behaviors and attributes and values of an individual, or a combination of them in a team, and actual outputs. And I think that's been really exciting for us.
Yeah, it's a great point, Rob, and certainly in reviewing all the fantastic work all of you have contributed here, that's what's struck me in a way. It's, you know, the frustration. I think, you know, in many cases the problem is well understood, even like it's easy to document the inequalities. That's not difficult to do. But somehow people are stating the problem over and over again, but not actually solving it. And as you know, Deborah was saying, and as you were picking up there, Rob, what we found is actually there's quite a lot of education missing as well, where people actually can't even articulate the problem properly in all cases. And that what chance do you have of solving a problem that you can't even describe yet? I'd like to come to you, Lucy. So the question that's in front of me here for you is that obviously Wish, it's a large network. So just curious about what kind of reactions have you seen from the Wish members to this work?
A positive one, and I think it comes back to that something that everybody I think's mentioned so far, which is about conversation, you know, and inclusion is an active pursuit, as Nick said, and, you know, to take action, you've got to talk about it. None of this happens in a vacuum, and I think anything that broadens the depth of the conversation or even starts a conversation is really, really valuable. And that's what the research is prompting with our members, is that, you know, that are those conversations, is that talking about it, is that thinking about it? Because, you know, nothing's going to happen unless you make a conscious effort. And the way to make a conscious effort is, like you say, you have to understand what the problem is. So talking about it is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, so I think, Robert, it'd be only fair if you tell everybody what GenMap's about, and also about some of the things that are coming next.
Yes.
So
you're going to share for me, I think.
Yeah.
My absolute failure earlier. What we need is less diversity of video platforms. I thought once you worked out one, you could do them all, but transpires that's not the case. So hopefully everybody can see. Hopefully we can see that. What I wanted just to share now. So this part of the kind of the session is really about asking how we can put all of this to the test. As our partners have said, and also as the report reflects, there's a lot of evidence in there, but it also leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Or in fact poses more questions. And I think while we've progressed our understanding, as Deborah said in her little slot there, where do we go next with this? So as you can see on the slide there, this big data people profile research is really about taking this research to the next level. And we would invite our audience members and to share this amongst the network. Please contact me directly. I'll give the details in a second. But in broad terms, what we want to do is conduct a meta-analysis to put to the test our data model. And I'll talk to you about GenMap in a second, which is how the vehicle that we're going to use for that. But what we're aiming to do is get 20 cross-industry partners to join in and submit very high-level organizational profile information. So almost just as simple as, we are an organization that's driven to achieve social purpose and influence, or creativity, or profit, or people. So what we want to be able to understand is what your business objectives are, and what and the kind of current makeup in terms of traits and behaviors of your teams and individuals within that. As a result of that study, we will pull together the meta-analysis, and that will be produced, published into this sort of next phase research report. And what that will do is use leverage the advantages of having a larger data set to be able to really get to pinpoint the links between those traits and behaviors and the kind of individual values and combinations of those values against and their efficacy in that combination in driving business outputs. The whole research session will involve 2 roundtable research workshops, and it includes a year subscription to GenMap. The cost of getting involved is £495. So, Chris, if you could just flick onto the next slide. Now, screenshots of our online tool. So GenMap is, I'm pleased to report, the manifestation of all of this research in a kind of in an online tool that allows organizations to very quickly match those the traits and behaviors of their people currently with their target business outputs, and it's very quick to use. And what we want to utilize this and road test it in anger through this meta-analysis and larger research study. The tool itself works in a very straightforward way. It asks you to determine your, as I said a second ago, just the high-level business objectives that you're set out to achieve, your current makeup, and then it matches the combination of those things with the individuals that you have in your organization and produces a bespoke report, which will tell you which traits and behaviors are very important to achieve that outcome, and which of those are represented most strongly in your current makeup in your team, like providing you a blueprint and a bit of a kind of almost gap analysis to be able to look to when you're recruiting. And again, I would stress, this isn't about recruiting, as we know, more men, more women, non-binary people. This is about looking to recruit for specific traits and behaviors that we want to be able to have in combination and work in concert in order to deliver these business outcomes. So as I say, the bottom of that slide there, you can see a link to what GenMap will do and some more information about that if you're interested. And at the top of the slide there, you can see my email address. If you'd like to take part, or you'd like to pass on this information or get more information to send to your networks and or organizations to make the case to be part of the research, please do so. Chris, that's everything from me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob. So that brings us to the end of the session today. I'd like to thank once more our fantastic research partners, Lucy, Nick, Alma, and Deborah, who have certainly challenged me many times over the last year, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the work. And thanks, Rob, for pulling it all together. As Rob said, please do get in touch if you'd like to be involved in this next phase. It's going to prove very interesting to see how this plays out and hopefully shape very much the next steps we can take in really making all of this wealth of research and evidence into something that identifies really what are the underlying causes and what should we do about that. So I look forward to sharing that journey with you, hopefully. Thank you, everyone, for joining, giving us your time today, and keep in touch.